Hello again, my beautiful listeners. It's a balmy summer's evening this side, and I have my usual cup of coffee because I am at heart a masochist. If you hear my chair squeaking in the background, this is entirely due to the fact that my chair squeaks, and I'm trying to record these things with as few edits as possible. I'm still without internet thanks to Vodacom, and how I finally load this up onto the internet is an uncertainty I've chosen not to care about for my own health, as well as Vodacom's. Once again, this video is sponsored by nobody because I suck and you should stab me. One thing that has always struck me as curious is how closely linked comedy and horror can be. How when a situation is played for laughs, lampshaded as hilarious, it's strange how a truly horrific scene can be made funny by the small changes in tone. How a truly funny book can suddenly have a truly horrific scene stitched seamlessly into the narrative without feeling out of place. Perhaps one of the funniest writers to have ever lived was Douglas Adams, and his book, The Restaurant at the End of the Universe, the second book in the Hitchhiker's Guide series, a trilogy in 5 parts. There is a chilling chapter, chapter 12, where our protagonist, Zaphod Beeblebrox, is escaping a long since dead, derelict world, and in the ruins of buildings and wrecked ships, he comes across a ship that is strangely still humming. Ship that is strangely still, there's your tongue twister for the day. Reading from chapter 12, like this far into the chapter, he rummaged feverishly among the debris lying on the floor all about him, and found a short length of tubing and a non-biodegradable plastic cup. Out of this he fashioned a crude stethoscope and placed it against the side of the ship. What he heard made his brains turn somersaults. The voice said, "Transstellar Cruise Lines would like to apologize to passengers for continuing delay to this flight. We are currently awaiting the loading of our complement of small lemon-soaked paper napkins for your comfort, refreshment and hygiene during the journey. Meanwhile, we thank you for your patience. The cabin crew will be serving coffee and biscuits again." Zaphod staggered backwards, staring wildly at the ship. He walked around for a few moments in a daze. In doing so, he suddenly caught sight of a giant departure board still hanging, but by only one support, from the ceiling above him. It was covered with grime, but some of the figures were still discernible. Zaphod's eyes searched among the figures, then made some brief calculations. His eyes widened. 900 years? He breathed to himself. That's how late the ship was? 2 minutes later he was on board. As he stepped out of the airlock, the air that greeted him was cool and fresh. The air conditioning was still working. The lights were still on. He moved out of the small entrance chamber into a short, narrow corridor and stepped nervously down it. Suddenly a door opened and a figure stepped out in front of him. "Please return to your seat, sir," said the android stewardess, and turning her back on him, she walked down the corridor in front of him. When his heart had stopped beating again, he followed her. She opened the door at the end of the corridor and walked through. He followed her through the door. They were now in the passenger compartment, and Zaphod's heart stopped still again for a moment. In every seat sat a passenger, strapped to his or her seat. The passengers' hair was long and unkempt, their fingernails were long, the men wore beards, all of them were quite clearly alive, but sleeping. Zaphod had the creeping horrors. He walked slowly down the aisle, as in a dream. By the time he was halfway down the aisle, the stewardess had reached the other end. She turned and spoke. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," she said sweetly. "Thank you for bearing with us during the slight delay. We will be taking off as soon as we possibly can. If you would like to wake up now, I will serve you coffee and biscuits." There was a slight hum. At that moment, all the passengers awoke. They awoke screaming and clawing at their straps and life support systems that held them tightly in their seats. They screamed and bawled and hollered until Zaphod thought his ears would shatter. They struggled and writhed as the stewardess patiently moved up the aisle, placing a small cup of coffee and a packet of biscuits in front of each one of them. Then one of them rose from his seat. He turned and looked at Zaphod. Zaphod's skin was crawling all over his body, as if it was trying to get off. He turned and ran from the bedlam. He plunged through the door and back into the corridor. The man pursued him. He raced in a frenzy to the end of the corridor, through the entrance chamber and beyond. He arrived on the flight deck, slammed and bolted the door behind him. He leaned back against the door, breathing hard. Within seconds, a hand started beating on the door. From somewhere in the flight deck, a metallic voice addressed him. "Passengers are not allowed on the flight deck. Please return to your seat and wait for the ship to take off. Coffee and biscuits are being served. This is your autopilot speaking. Please return to your seat." Zaphod said nothing. He breathed hard. Behind him, the hand continued to knock on the door. "Please return to your seat," repeated the autopilot. "Passengers are not allowed on the flight deck." "I'm not a passenger," panted Zaphod. "Please return to your seat." "I'm not a passenger," shouted Zaphod again. "Please return to your seat." "I'm not a... Hello, can you hear me? Please return to your seat." "You're the autopilot," said Zaphod. "Yes," said the voice from the flight console. "You're in charge of the ship?" "Yes," said the voice again. "There has been a slight delay. Passengers are to be kept temporarily in suspended animation for their comfort and convenience. Coffee and biscuits are being served every year, after which passengers are returned to suspended animation for their continued comfort and convenience. Departure will take place when the flight stores are complete. We apologize for the delay." Zaphod moved away from the door on which the pounding had now ceased. He approached the flight console. "Delay?" he cried. "Have you seen the world outside this ship? It's a wasteland, a desert. Civilization's been and gone, man. There are no lemon-soaked paper napkins on the way from anywhere." "The statistical likelihood," continued the autopilot primly, "is that other civilizations will arise. There will one day be lemon-soaked paper napkins. Till then there will be a short delay. Please return to your seat." Here ends today's reading. And I found this scene funny as a child. Reading it so many years ago, but this chapter gave me a strange chill reading it again as an adult. Perhaps it's because, as adults, we've been exposed to gut-wrenching bureaucracy, but this is a good example of how subtle changes in lamp shading can shift the comedic to horror hues and tones of a book that's otherwise just funny to something that's existentially terrifying. Anyways, there's that. Please support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee. Links in the Total Perspective Vortex below. Please take care of one another and don't panic.